Hello and welcome to Gaffy's Grinds. My name is Mr. Gaffy, and in these videos we will be taking some junior science concepts and we will be breaking them down for you, and we will try and help you understand them, and we'll be giving you some practice to do. A reminder to turn off your phone or to at least put it somewhere where it can't distract you. So stick it in another room or put it on Do Not Disturb. Anything that means it won't distract you is good. And make sure that during this video, if you're going to go to the time of watching the video, make sure that you're doing the tasks, the questions that I ask you to do, and that you're correcting them. If you don't do that, you're not going to learn anything and really just wasting your time watching the videos. Today, we are going to learn about bacteria. So this is a bacteria. I'm drawing a bacteria. And a bacteria, it has a cell wall. So a bacteria has a cell wall. The cell wall strengthens and protects the cell. That's the cell wall. A bacterial cell has a cell membrane. So I'm drawing this inside the cell wall like this. This is the cell membrane. Controls what goes in and out of the cell. It's the cell membrane. I'm drawing some ribosomes. A bacterial cell has ribosomes. Ribosomes make proteins. So the job of the ribosomes is to manufacture or to produce proteins for the cell. So the ribosomes produce proteins. I'm drawing what's called a chromosome. This is the DNA. This is chromosomal DNA. Bacteria have no nucleus. They have chromosomal DNA. And a chromosome is just a bunched up load of DNA. So I've got a chromosomal DNA. I'm going to just highlight this in another color. I'm going to highlight it in orange. Orange is the chromosomal DNA. Just to repeat, a bacterial cell does not have a nucleus. Does not have a nucleus. The chromosomal DNA controls the activities of the cell. What I am drawing here is a kind of a tail-like structure, and it's called a flagellum. Flagellum. This is the flagellum. And the flagellum helps the bacterial cell to move around. So the job of the flagellum is movement, provides movement for the cell. A bacterial cell has a slime coat, which I'm drawing on in red. So around the outside of the cell, it's got a slime coat. And what the slime coat does is it protects the bacteria from any toxins or chemicals that might be in its environment that might help to hurt it or help to kill it. So the slime coat helps to protect the bacteria. So this red, what I've drawn in red, is what's called the slime coat. This is the slime coat. It protects the cell, protects the bacteria. So just a quick recap. The cell wall, its job is to strengthen and protect the cell. It strengthens and protects. Cell wall strengthens and protects the cell. Cell membrane controls what materials can pass in and out. So it controls what can pass in and out of the cell. Things that might need to go in are things like oxygen and water, food. Things that might need to go out are things like wastes. Carbon dioxide is a gas that is a waste, and it needs to be removed from the cell, so it needs to pass out of the cell. Sometimes water might also need to pass out of the cell if there is too much water inside the cell. The ribosomes, their job is to produce proteins. So parts, if a bacteria needs to produce a lot of protein, then it would have a lot of ribosomes. So the job of the ribosomes is to produce proteins. Ribosomes produce proteins. The chromosomal DNA is what a bacterial cell has instead of a nucleus. The bacteria has no nucleus. It has chromosomal DNA, and the DNA controls the activities of the cell. That's its job. So a function is like a jaw, and the function of the chromosomal DNA is to control the activities of the cell. The flagellum is a kind of a tail-like structure that's able to move. It kind of wafts and pushes the cell along. So the job of the flagellum is movement. So the function of the flagellum is to help the bacteria cell to move. The slime coat protects the bacteria from chemicals. So it protects the bacteria. So on the big picture of things, let's have a look at some of the things that a bacteria cell has that we haven't seen in a plant and an animal cell. A bacteria cell has a flagellum. A flagellum we did not find on a bacteria or on a plant or an animal cell. A bacteria has a slime coat. We did not find a slime coat on the plant or the animal cell. A bacteria does not have a nucleus. We found a nucleus in a plant and an animal cell. A bacteria cell does not have a nucleus. A bacteria cell does have a cell wall. A plant cell has a cell wall as well, but an animal cell does not. Okay, so it's time to do some practice questions now. So in your practice copies or wherever you're doing your questions here, I've got some questions. I would like you to pause the video and I would like you to answer the questions. So it's really important, as I always say, to actually do these tasks. That's going to make sure you learn stuff. If you don't, you're wasting your time. Don't just wait for me to put the answers up. Okay, so pause the video and do the questions now. All right, you should only be listening to my voice if you have done these questions. So which of the following parts do plant and animal cells have that bacteria cells do not have? Okay, so the correct answer here is a nucleus. Plant and animal cells have a nucleus, bacteria cells do not. So I've highlighted nucleus. Bacteria does have a slime coat and it does have a cell wall. It does not have a nucleus. Question 2. Bacterial cells and plant cells both have which of the following? So it's either nucleus, cell wall, or flagellum. So bacterial cells and plant cells, we're comparing bacteria and plant cells. Which one of the following do they both have? Well, a plant cell has a nucleus, but a bacteria doesn't, so I can't pick that one. A plant cell has a cell wall, and a bacterial cell also has a cell wall. So I'm going to highlight cell wall. So I hope you wrote down cell wall. Let's just check the last one to see, maybe there's two right answers. So bacteria cells have a flagellum, but plant cells do not. So I am not going to write down flagellum. So cell wall is the correct answer. What I want you to do now is I want you to pause the video and I want you to write out these sentences and fill in some key words. So each sentence is missing a key word. So what I want you to do is I want you to pause the video and write out the full sentence and the missing key word. So don't just write the key word, practice writing the full sentence because this is good to get you practicing writing science. So pause the video and complete the task now. Okay, so you should only be listening to my voice again now if you have paused the video and you have written the full sentences with the key words. They should be all pretty easy. Okay, bacteria cells do not have, what's that? That should be nucleus. So bacteria cells do not have a nucleus. That's the first one. They have something DNA. So they have chromosomal DNA. Chromosomal DNA. So they have chromosomal DNA. Bacteria have a something so they can move. Bacteria have a flagellum so they can move. Have a flagellum. Bacteria have ribosomes that produce, well, ribosomes, the job of the ribosomes is to produce proteins. Well done if you got that right. Bacteria have a cell, something that controls what goes in and out of the cell. Well, bacteria have a cell wall and a cell membrane. Both of those could fit here. So I've got to decide which one I'm going to pick. Well, bacteria have a cell something that controls what goes in and out of the cell. So which one of these controls which goes out and in and out of the cell? That would be the cell membrane. So you should have wrote cell membrane. They have a cell something that protects and strengthens the cell. Well, that's the other one. They have a cell wall. They don't have something that releases energy. So think back to the plant and the animal cell and think of the part or the organelle in the plant and the animal cell that released energy. And I did not draw them in the plant and the bacteria cell. What would that be? So you've got to think back, a little bit of recall now, or retrieval of old information, which is really important skill. Okay, if you didn't know already, have a think back now. Okay, it would be this one, the mitochondria. Mitochondria. That's what releases energy for the cell. Okay, there is the full thing with the answers. If you need to take anything down, do it now. Pause the video and make any corrections. Make sure you're correcting your work. So you should be using a red or a different color pen than what you wrote in to correct your work right now. Okay, I'm going to leave this diagram here. And what I suggest is that you try and draw it down. Okay, now ideally I would pause the video. I will get you to pause the video and I will get you to try and draw as much of it as you can without looking at the video. So pause the video, maybe turn your screen around and try and draw as much as you can without looking at the screen. But it is there to help you fill in anything that you don't know. So do that now, please. Again, I will remind you that if you have to copy all of this down, then you're probably not going to learn as much as if you really try to do it yourself first and then look at the screen for help. Okay, but don't just copy straight from the screen. Okay. So bacteria you will have heard of before. We usually talk about them in terms of things that make you sick. And yes, some of them can make you sick. We're going to look at that in a minute, but there's a little bit more to it than that. They're not always just nasty things that make us sick. Just want to recall a word from our previous lesson. We had this word before, and the word organism. So we have the word organism. We learned this word in our first lesson. What is an organism? So on 3, I want you to speak your answer out loud to the screen. What is an organism? On 3, 1, 2, 3. I'm hoping you said an organism is a living thing. An organism is just a name, a word to describe a living thing. And bacteria are an example of a living thing. But there are two groups of things, which are two groups of organisms. We can put them into two groups. And organisms can be, and the way we're grouping these is based on how many cells they have. How many cells they have. So an organism can be either what we call unicellular. Unicellular. Let's break this word down. Uni means one. One. So where would you have seen this word before? Well, a unicycle is a bicycle with one wheel. So I don't know if you've ever seen, maybe at a circus, you might have seen somebody riding a unicycle. It's a really funny looking bike, a really strange looking thing, but it's just got one wheel and on top of it, you've got a seat and you just sit on it and you just pedal and you try and keep yourself balanced. That's a unicycle. Uni means one because it's got one wheel. Well, this is a unicellular organism. It's an organism made of only one cell. The whole organism is just one cell. Now, unicellular things, so yeah, we're just going to write underneath unicellular. This means it's made of one cell. Now, because this organism, the whole organism is just one cell, these tend to be what we call microscopic organisms, which just means microscopic. We saw in the previous chapter, a microscope means it's for seeing things, making things look bigger. So what would microscopic mean in terms of one-celled organisms? Well, microscopic just means it's so small that you need a microscope to see them. So we call them microscopic organisms. So most things that are made of one cell are microscopic, which just means that you need a microscope to see them. If they're not unicellular, then they have more than one cell. These are what we call multicellular. So organisms which are made of more than one cell are multicellular. Multi just means many. So many cells. So this means many cells. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to show you this much of it. And what I want you to do is I want you to write this down, organisms. An organism is a living thing and it can be. I want you to tell me the two categories and what each category means. So pause the video now and try and complete the bit that you can't see on the diagram that's below the screen. So pause the video, do that now. Okay, so I'm hoping, and you should only be listening to my voice if you have tried to complete the diagram. Organisms can be either unicellular or multicellular. Unicellular or multicellular. Those are the two options. Now, what does unicellular mean? You need to write underneath. What does unicellular mean? If you haven't done that already, do it now. And what does multicellular mean? If you haven't done that already, do it now. Pause the video. Okay, so unicellular means one cell, multicellular means many cells. Now, obviously, if we take a look then at unicellular organisms, here are two cells. These are two separate cells. They are not attached to each other. Two separate cells. So these are two cells. And that means that they are two separate organisms. Because one of these cells by itself is an organism. So we've got two separate organisms. Now, you can have millions of these together in one group. So you could have, for example, bacteria grow everywhere. So even on your kitchen counter or on your table that you're working on right now, there will be bacteria all over the table. And this is why we regularly need to wash our hands, especially before we go and eat or after we use the toilet, because bacteria can get all over your hands really quickly, and you can get quite a lot of them, like billions of them on your hands at any particular time. Now, just because you've got a billion of them together, that does not mean they're multicellular. They're still unicellular. You've just got billions of them on your hands. You've got billions of separate organisms on your hand. If we look in contrast at a multicellular organism, we generally tend to have more complex structures. So, for example, a human. If we take a human, we're talking about trillions of cells. Trillions of cells to make one organism. Now, if you take any one of your cells, if you were to take one muscle cell or one brain cell or one skin cell, none of those things, if just one of those cells is a human. They're a cell that belongs to a bigger organism. They're not a human by themselves. Whereas if we take one bacteria cell, that is a full bacteria. Okay, so that's the difference here. Trillions of cells to make up a multicellular organism, and only one cell to make up a unicellular organism. Some examples of a unicellular organism are things like, example, where we've already seen the bacteria. Bacteria is an example of a unicellular organism. Another example is something called yeast. And people who are interested in cooking or who do home economics may have heard of yeast before, because we use it to make bread. We use it to make wine and cheese. So we will have a closer look at yeast later on, but both of these things are single-celled organisms or unicellular. They've only got one cell. Each organism is one cell. Examples then of multicellular things are things like plants and animals. Now, you could never have something as big and complicated as a plant with its, if say a big tree, you've got a tree trunk, you've got fruits, you've got maybe acorns or something like that, you've got leaves, you've got roots, you've got all these different parts, you've got flowers. There's not possible that all of those could be just one cell. It's way, way, way more than one cell. It's trillions of cells. Okay, so that's the big idea here. All right, so what I'm going to get you to do there is I'm going to get you to pause the video and take down the rest of that, take down the examples of the different types of organisms. So you do that now for me. Great, great. It's time to do some more practice. Over we go, and we have some more practice questions for you. So I've got questions here, questions 1 to 8. I want you to pause the video and I want you to do those now, please. Okay, a reminder that if you're not going to do the tasks, you are wasting your time. You will learn a lot by doing these tasks. They're carefully designed, but if you don't do them, you're not going to learn as much, or you might learn anything. So it's really important that you do them. Let's take a look. Should be correct in your work now in a different color pen. Make sure you correct it and fix any of the questions that aren't correct. Okay, so we have, in terms of the number of cells that make them up, what are the two categories of organisms? So in terms of the number of cells that make them up, that's important. That's how we're comparing. Well, they can either be one-celled, which is unicellular, or they can be multicellular. So unicellular or multicellular, those are the options. Unicellular or multicellular? Okay, that's what we would say, unicellular or multicellular. Some organisms are unicellular. What does this mean? This means the organism is made of just one cell. That's what that means, unicellular. Some organisms are multicellular. What does this mean? Well, this means, well, if you didn't know this, maybe you can answer it from seeing number 2 done. So if you didn't know number 3, maybe you can pause the video now and do it after seeing number 2. So pause the video and do it now. Okay, so we would say some organisms are multicellular. This means that the organism is made of many cells. A particular cell cannot move. What part would help it to move? So think back to when we drew the bacterial cell. What part helped it to move? Now again, as I always remind you, you should be doing this from memory, not checking any notes that you made. Try and do it from memory. Okay, well, it would be the flagellum. So the flagellum part would help it to move if it had a flagellum. A particular cell has more ribosomes than the average cell. What do you think the function of this cell is? Okay, so it's asking you in a roundabout way. Well, what do you think the job of that cell is? Well, it's got a lot of ribosomes, more ribosomes than the average cell. So think about, what do ribosomes do? Ribosomes make proteins. So the function of this cell would be to make proteins of some kind. To make proteins. A particular cell takes in glucose and excretes carbon dioxide. All right, I'm going to have to give you another clue there. There's not enough information for you guys there. So I'm going to add in something else. I'm going to give you a word, respiration. Respiration. Okay, so I've given you an extra clue. So a particular cell takes in glucose and excretes carbon dioxide during respiration. What part of the cell controls this process? So this is a bit of a recall, because you've got to think back to a previous video when we learned about plant and animal cells. We talked about a part that respiration happens in. What is the name of this part? So maybe you can answer it now. Please pause the video. Okay, so you should be watching. If you try to do that, that would be this part here, the mitochondria. So in the mitochondria is where that happens. Well done if you said mitochondria. The cytoplasm is mostly liquid. Explain why it can flow. Okay, so again, this is more retrieval. We're thinking back to when we studied particles. So you guys, my class have studied particles before. And if you haven't, then you can go back and watch the videos that I've made for particles when we discussed why things flow. But why can it flow? Well, it's a liquid, and liquids can flow because the particles can move. Because the particles can move. Solids cannot flow because the particles are arranged in regular rows and they're held tightly together, which means that the particles can't move. They're not able to move. So liquids and gases can flow because the particles can move. Jenny reads that there are millions of bacteria that live in your gut. She says this means that bacteria are multicellular because there's millions of them. Explain why she is wrong. So what you needed to do here is write a refutation paragraph. A refutation paragraph explains why an idea is wrong. So Jenny thinks that because there's millions of bacteria in your gut, if there's millions of them, they must be multicellular. Explain why she is wrong. Well, we would start this off like this. She is wrong because. Now, if you weren't sure how to start it, now that I've helped you to start it, you should go pause the video and try and finish it now. She is wrong because. Pause the video, try finish that now. Okay, well, why is she wrong? Again, she is wrong because the millions of bacteria in your gut. Now, it's not wrong to say that there are millions of bacteria in your gut. That fact is correct. But the fact here is that it's not just one giant multicellular organism in your gut. The millions of bacteria are separate organisms. They're separate and are separate unicellular organisms. So it's kind of like this. We've got one unicellular organism, and just over here, this is a group of, I don't know, maybe 15 or 20, but they're still separate unicellular organisms. They're just, yes, there is a group of them, but it's still, each one is a separate organism. That's the key thing here. Okay, so she is wrong because the millions of bacteria are separate unicellular organisms. It's not wrong to say that there's loads of bacteria there. There is, but they are separate organisms. So well done if you wrote that or something very similar to that. Now, why are we so interested in bacteria and unicellular organisms? Well, most people associate unicellular organisms with very negative things, with like harmful things. And yes, there is a reason for that, because some unicellular organisms can cause us, our health to be impacted in some way. A good example of this is if we consider the example of a piece of raw chicken. Tasty. Well, not raw chicken, but once we cook it, it's going to be tasty. Chicken makes up a major part of most of our diets, really. Probably a lot of us, if we eat meat, a lot of the meat we eat is chicken. Now, bacteria, remember, are microscopic. They're really tiny. And bacteria grow nearly on every surface. So even, no matter what piece of meat you have, it's going to have some bacteria on it. And bacteria will grow on any surface, including on your meat. Now, if you're lucky enough and your meat is fresh, there will only be a very small amount of bacteria on it, like this. So there's only maybe a couple of little bacterial cells on it, if it's fresh. So if it's fresh, there will be a couple of bacteria on it. Now, let's say the bacteria on here is a bacteria called E. coli. E. coli is a bacteria which causes food poisoning. It does harm your health pretty badly. You can get pretty serious and nasty side effects. Very sick from it if you get food poisoning. And you get this by E. coli getting into your bloodstream from your food, and then it's going to make you sick. Now, if you're lucky enough that you've got fresh meat and there's only a couple of bacteria like this on there, well, what do we do to try and get rid of it? Well, we're going to cook it. We cook our meat first before we eat it. And cooking means that we add heat. And the heat basically provides an environment that the bacteria don't like. So an extreme environment, high heat, and what that ends up doing is first of all, it cooks our meat and it makes it taste really tasty. This is cooked chicken. I love cooked chicken. It really is tasty. But what's more important here is that as well as making your meat tastier, it means that E. coli are dead. You have killed the E. coli because the heat, there's enough heat there to get rid of these small amount of bacteria. So this is what we would say is safe. It's safe to eat now. It's tasty and it's safe to eat. That's E. coli. Now, of course, this is why it's really, really important to cook chicken properly. If we don't cook chicken all the way through, if we just cook it on the pan for like 2 minutes, that's not enough, because the outside of the chicken will look like it's cooked. But on the inside of the chicken is still raw. So it's still cold. The heat hasn't actually got in there and it hasn't managed to kill the bacteria that are inside your meat. And in that case, there will still be bacteria growing inside the meat. And if you eat the meat, then you are going to get sick. Another scenario is if we've got another piece of raw chicken, but we've stored it incorrectly, or we've left it too long past its sell-by date. If we store it incorrectly, and what I mean by incorrectly is if you don't keep it in the fridge or you don't keep it at the right temperature, cold temperatures prevent bacteria from reproducing. And if we allow it a nice warm environment, like on your kitchen counter for like a couple of days, or if we let it go way past its sell-by date, and we give it enough time for this bacteria to reproduce and really start to take over the meat. So here, as you can see, the bacterial load, the amount of bacteria here is way higher. So the E. coli have completely covered the meat now. Now, if you're lucky enough and you were to perhaps get a smell of this meat before you started to cook it, you would be able to smell that it was gone off, because the E. coli, when they're living, basically will produce a lot of wastes, and these wastes don't smell very pleasant. So this is why gone off meat would have a bad smell, because E. coli are producing chemicals which don't smell very good. But if you were somebody who just threw the meat on, you just took it out of the packet and you threw it straight on the pan, you didn't have a smell of it, and it's gone way past its sell by date, or it's been stored at a warm temperature. Well, what happens here is that, of course, you cook it and you apply lots of heat, but even that amount of heat, you've got your cooked chicken now, yeah, you cook it, your chicken is still going to look cooked. But your problem is that you've killed some of the bacteria, but you haven't managed to kill all of it. So you're probably going to eat and ingest some of this E. coli. So this is not safe. So this is an example. E. coli is an example of a bacteria that can cause harm to our health. We want to avoid this. But that doesn't mean we need to be scared of all microorganisms or all unicellular organisms. I told you earlier about yeast. And yeast is a really interesting organism, because it's really useful for baking. And it's useful for baking because if we wanted to make bread, for example, to make bread, we would take some flour. And to that flour, we would add sugar. Okay, and we would mix it up in a bowl. So here's your flour and your sugar. We would put it into the bowl. And the last thing we would do is we would take a packet of yeast. This time, the purple dots are what we call yeast. And yeast is a unicellular fungus. A unicellular fungus. It's one cell. The organism is one cell, and it belongs to the fungi group, which is the same group that mushrooms belong to. But this obviously isn't a mushroom. A mushroom is a much bigger, and it's a multicellular organism. This is a unicellular fungus. We'll take the yeast and we will put it into the mixture of flour and sugar. We would then leave the dough. Okay, so this is now made what we call bread dough. So this here now is bread dough. So we'll mix it up and we've got bread dough. What we would then do is we would take our bread dough and we would leave it for 30 minutes. Why do we leave it for 30 minutes? Well, we've added yeast, which of course we know is unicellular. Yeast is unicellular. And what the yeast does is it feeds on the sugars. So it feeds on the sugar. So the yeast essentially it uses sugar, the sugar that we put in here, as its food. So that's why I've said yeast plus sugar. And when it does this, one of the wastes it releases is a product, a gas product called carbon dioxide. What this carbon dioxide does is, because it's a gas, it causes the bread dough to rise, gets bigger, because the gas kind of makes it blow up, makes it expand. So this is, we say our bread dough rises. This is a really important step. This is now ready to cook, our bread dough which has risen. And this would not happen if we did not put the yeast in. If we just put the sugar and the flour in, no yeast, we don't get our bread dough to rise. And if we went and ate the bread, we could go ahead and cook it. But if we went and ate the bread, it would be really small and flat and a bit nasty. Okay, so the yeast, this is a magical little tool here that humans have managed to exploit and use to our advantage. And this is just one of many ways in which we can use a microorganism or a unicellular organism to our advantage. So at this stage, we're going to go and we're going to take a look. I want you to take a look at a couple of scenarios of different uses or dangers. So is it a use or a danger? So I want you to state below whether each of these is a way we can use, or it's something to do with a unicellular organism. So I want you to say, is it a use of a unicellular organism or is it a danger? So I'll show you how to do it. I'll look at the first one. Well, bacteria can be added to sewage to break down harmful chemicals. So this is a way of taking our sewage that leaves our homes with like human waste in it and break it down and get rid of harmful chemicals so that we could send the water back to the lake. Now, if we don't break down harmful chemicals and we put the water back into a lake, what's going to happen is we're going to cause environmental damage. We're going to kill fish, kill plants, that kind of thing. So is this a use or a danger? Well, I think that sounds pretty cool. It gets rid of wastes. It gets rid of dangerous chemicals, harmful chemicals. I'd say that's a use. That's a way we can use microorganisms. Okay, so in the same way, you're going to either say use or danger for each one of these. Okay, so I want to pause the video and do that now, please. Okay, so we're just going to correct these now. So a different color pen. Bacteria live in the gut and help our digestive system. Does that sound like a use or a danger? Well, they're helping our digestive system. So that sounds good. That's a use. Bacteria, so that's a way they help our health. So I told you about E. coli, which hurt us or which damage our health. Well, this is a way they help our health. Bacteria and fungi digest dead organisms and they release useful nutrients. So when organisms die, like dead rabbits or dead leaves, bacteria and fungi can break them down and release nutrients back into the soil again. That sounds good. That's a use. I hope you said use. Good. Number 4, bacteria can infect wounds on the skin after surgery and cause infections. That does not sound good. That is a danger. So this is a way they can harm us. That's a danger. Fungi such as yeast are used in brewing and baking. So brewing is making beer or wines, and baking is making tasty, yummy, tasty stuff like breads, muffins, all that kind of stuff. Oh, that sounds good. Use. Bacteria can reproduce in the body and release toxins causing disease. That does not sound good. That's a danger. Fungi can infect parts of the bodies causing athlete's foot and thrush. I don't like the sound of that. That is a danger. So you should have said danger. And lastly, fungi make antibiotics which are used to treat bacterial infections. Sounds great. And in fact, this is one of the greatest inventions of all time because this has managed to keep a hell of a lot of people alive and has helped to cure a hell of a lot of diseases. So these are really, really important, and they only exist because humans have figured out how to take these unicellular organisms and use them to our advantage. So you may have known a little bit about bacteria before this, and you may have thought bacteria are always bad, but hopefully after today's lesson, you've learned that yes, some of them are bad and some of them can impact our health in a negative way. But in fact, more of these on the list here are actually uses of microorganisms or unicelled organisms. All right, guys, so thank you for joining us. If you can, give the video a like. It helps other students who might need help with this topic to find the video. And if you want to subscribe to the channel, it means you will see when I release the next video, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.